liar, thief, murderer, adulterer. Four main words to describe who I've been over the past 15 years prior to the one where we currently reside. Ages 21 through 36. When those in my presence didn't see me as a minister, I was truly a monster. 15 years. 15 years I can't get back. I don't want to walk around now acting like I'm all innocent and I've never done nothing and my hands are completely clean. I'm still a work in progress like many of you that are listening now. I've truly damaged many people, done a lot of damage to myself because of malice that was in my heart towards so many things. I'm not taking this time to talk to blame anybody else for my mess, because all of the blame truly falls on me. Nothing was done by force. It was all done by choice. At the age of 20, I gave my life to Christ. During the age of 20, I answered my calling for music. I was moved by what I watched people do in the choir stands. And once I got in the choir stands, I watched people move to the things that I do as well. As God moved through me, it truly ignited people. People saw an anointing over me, unlike they had never seen before. One they could feel all around the room, no matter where I was. And then I took it another step. I used to rap for the world, but then I started to rap for Christ. And when I shared gospel rap, I ignited the youth and even older folks who frowned on rap because they were in the church. I helped them to lean towards a change of heart. There were times where I prayed with people inside the church, outside the church. I watched one young man receive the Holy Spirit during a prayer that we shared. I saw at least, well, I won't even go back and try to track the number. I saw several people from the street who claimed gang life break down in tears while I prayed with them and spoke with them and turned their lives around. I saw complete 360 right before my eyes as God did work. Outside of the church, it was people who were sick, never believed that they would get better. With one prayer shared, sometimes at the bus stop, we were both on the way to separate places. Sometimes just merely crossing paths as we walked the street. I prayed, and by the time I ran into these people again, the sickness was gone. I went from being a prayer partner to being a friend, just like that. And it didn't go any further than that. And then there came a time that I preached. And when I preached, you had those who kind of gave a whatever type reaction to it, but you had others who could never forget when I was at that pulpit, because I spoke something into them that woke something up that they never knew even existed in them. But I was also taught prior to when I went to the pulpit, if the word you preach becomes your judgment, you too shall be condemned. There were things that I preached about that did become my judgment shortly after that. A few months prior to when I preached my first sermon, there was a young lady who caught my attention. Every time I got off work, and I would see her from such a distance where I could get a full view of her, but she never even saw me. I would be on the way one place, she would be on the way another. But her spirit, her beauty, always caught my attention. So then one day we ran into each other at a music store. I found out we both walked for Christ. It did something to me because it was ladies in my own church who I had to keep my distance from, because although they were there, they weren't about being with no church boy outside the church. They wanted to do their own thing. When it came time to show God gratitude, to express their love for God, they were usually the type that would sit around and laugh at folks like myself that were radicals. But this young lady was a radical. I saw it when she found the CD she was looking for and gave God a hallelujah shout right in the middle of a store where nobody else was even thinking about God outside of myself. We fellowshipped, we exchanged numbers, we talked for a little while. Then there was a time I kept calling and couldn't get an answer, so I had given up on her. But shortly after I preached this sermon, it was put on my heart to call her again one night, even months after I had left a voicemail saying goodbye to her. So I took heed to the call. I learned about a lot of things that were taking place that I had no knowledge of. Her mother was going through a divorce from a man who just up and left her after decades of marriage. And the young lady who I had an interest in was actually entertaining the company of another young man. But it was only because that's what she had access to at the time. She didn't have access to anything different. When I talked to her that night, I found out she had many needs that required prayer. And after I prayed with her, we would keep in touch. We would talk at least once or twice a week. Fast forward, there was a night after I did an open mic night at the church, and her and I just randomly had a conversation. Now, mind you, up to this point, I had chose to walk single from the time I gave my life to Christ for nearly a year. And during the time that I had given up contact with this young lady, I had ran back into someone that I used to work with. We gave it a shot, but it did not last long because I was practicing celibacy and I was practicing righteousness in God. She was interested in knowing how to live for God and developing a prayer life, but she definitely wasn't interested in celibacy, and she definitely wasn't interested in living by all the rules that were required to live righteous. So we had just decided to be friends and left it at that. It was literally a day after I parted ways with her for the sake of living for Christ that I got back in touch with this young lady who shared my radical spirit for Christ. And in the midst of one conversation, after she learned I had given up on her and everything, she encouraged me not to give up and to give her a try. She let go of the young man she was entertaining because she knew it was no good for her. So we took it on for about a month, sharing Bible studies, because at the time it was long distance, Bible studies over the phone, prayers, revivals right in our own homes. She saw something in me that she had found in nobody else, and it's something she felt safe, secure with, something she rejoiced in, something that she had glee and joy over every time she took me in. So much so, a night before she took her boards to become a registered nurse and she had nerves, it was me that she turned to for prayer. After the prayer, the conversation stopped. All I know is the next day I learned she passed with flying colors. So by the time we had reached a month, we were coming up on my 21st birthday. And we both had a mutual desire to spend that time together. So that last week of that month that year, I had taken off work and taken a Greyhound so we could spend time together, with an engagement ring in my pocket that she didn't know about. I went up there. I proposed to her. She did say yes. I proposed to her through song. And then by the next morning, we went to a church service, which was in a conference room at a hotel at the time. And she saw how into it I wasn't and was just wondering, where is this man that she's got to know over the past few months over the phone? Where is this man she ran into at the music store when she was introduced? Where is this radical that she had been introduced to? Where is this one that's on fire for Christ no matter what? The one that didn't need a spiritual cheerleader because he was his own. Where was he? So the next day after that, we were having a talk. And I just asked her about adopting the spirit of speaking in tongues. And how did she get there? And she let me know someone prayed over her before it happened. So I asked her, would she pray over me so that I could develop the spirit of tongues? She agreed to it. She prayed over me. And I started to fake the spirit of tongues. I started to force it. She identified it. Long before I stopped the facade, she had already left the room. I opened my eyes, went to find her, and said, "Thank you. I adopted the spirit of tongues." She said, "No, you didn't." So at this time, she no longer had a comfort around me because of how fabricated I was. So at that time, I had went from thinking about living for God to thinking about losing the first woman who had truly made me happy. I had a fear of losing her that triumphed the reverence I had found in God when I came to him, when I started my relationship with him. So I didn't have much to say the rest of that day. I was just waiting to hear her say that things were okay. Those words never happened. At one point, she left to go and pick up her mother. And usually, from the time I had been there, that was a trip we took together. She told me to just wait here and I'll be back. I need to talk to my grandmother. The only time she talked to her grandmother was when she was unsure about somebody. If her grandma said yes, give it a try, she listened. But if her grandma said no, let it go, she also listened. So I laid there at her mother's house in panic until she got back. We had went for hours without talking that night. Then I just outright asked, "What do I need to do so you don't keep feeling that way?" She didn't have much more to say. She said she was unsure, to just give her time. The next morning, still in fear, I woke up. I got into my word. And at the time when I used to get into my word, I would play music at the same time. I had it in my headphones thinking it wouldn't be too much of a disturbance. But you're in a hotel room. It's 5:30 in the morning. Nothing else is going on but you sleeping in two separate beds. It's not hard to hear anything. I turned the music on. She was abruptly awakened from her sleep. She stormed to the bathroom, slammed the door, locked it, and turned the fan on. At that point, my fear heightened. So I stopped reading. I stopped listening to the music. I got down on my knees. And I started to pray that God wouldn't break us up, because this is the first time I've been happy in my whole life. And I can't keep count of how many minutes that prayer took place. All I know is I opened my eyes. She was across the room looking me in my eyes, and she said, "It's over. I have to let you go. You're putting me on a pedestal over God, and I can't continue to let you do that." I jumped across my bed, down to my knees on the floor. I begged her to change her mind. She was not convinced. She went to pick up her mother, and while she was away, I tried to hang myself with a towel in the bathroom. A friend of mine at the time from church called me while I was in the act of it, and it was his words that talked me down from what I was doing. He had even suggested that I came on home that day instead of staying where I was for the whole week. After she came back and found out about what I had done, she made sure I did not leave her sight anymore for the rest of the time we were there. Well, at least for a little bit. The next day, trying to numb the pain of losing her, I asked her to pass me some wine. Prior to this time, I had never drank alcohol in my life. I took in a couple of glasses. That night, with the alcohol in my system, I tried to force myself onto her sexually. Again, mind you, I was celibate 2 years, 8 months up until this point. But I tried to force myself on her sexually so that she could have my child and have a reason to hold on to me. My attempts were not successful. Thankfully, by the next morning, all was forgiven. So much to the point, she had went to have a conversation with a friend in another room the next day to tell them she didn't want to let me know, but she actually was tempted to give in to me the night before. While she was in that room and I was in another room by myself, at that time we had talked things out. We had agreed I would do what I needed to do to straighten up my walk in Christ. We would explore trying to be together again later, but for now, I needed to focus on being the man of God I was called to be and being pure about it. We were good. Then the devil stepped in. I'm not blaming everything on the devil. Let me make that plain right now. But the devil stepped in while I was in the room by myself. Because one of the many things I said was, I'll be just fine. I'm going to do what I have to do. We're going to be great friends, and we're going to work this out. The devil's first word was, why are you lying to yourself? You won't be fine. You're not going to make it without her. You done put someone before God, and you done shown before her that you're a fake. What makes you think that anything you do will be blessed? The rest of your life will be cursed, and no matter how hard you try, you're coming to join me in hell. You might as well get it over with. I heard dark laughter after those words, gave in to those words after minutes of wrestling with myself, picked up the biggest chef's knife I could find in her mother's kitchen. And right after I picked it up and stared at it, she came out the room from the conversation with her friend. I hid the knife. She asked me to go outside because she needed a jacket out the car. And I believe it's because she knew what was going on without telling me. Because when I came back and tried to find the knife again, she let me know, if you're looking for the knife, I put it away and you're not going to find it. I yelled at her about it. I found another knife. I tried to rush into the bathroom because I knew I didn't want to do what I was about to do in her sight. In her spirit, she knew that too. Because right before I closed the door to that bathroom to lock it, she stepped into the little wedge that stood between her and that door closing. And she closed the door and she stood in front of me. She talked and talked and talked with me for close to 35 minutes. It took her saying, if you're going to kill yourself, you're going to have to kill me too. Because if you send yourself to hell, I'm going to go through hell for the rest of my life for me to drop the knife and stop what I was doing. After sitting on the floor, weeping and being comforted for a while, apologies did follow for my behavior. And she did minister the word of God into me after I explained to her what the devil had told me. After that, we went out to eat that night and put what had happened behind us. The next day was my 21st birthday. She still took me out as she agreed to celebrate my birthday. We weren't even thinking about the breakup at the time. We were just celebrating being together. Right before I got ready to leave that night to go back home on a Greyhound, a feeling came over me because I was about to part ways with her again. And in my solitude, I cursed God. And in cursing him, I let him know, since he didn't care about my happiness, since he didn't care about me having anything that made me feel good, I no longer cared about what made him feel good either. I was done with reading my Bible. I was done with preaching. I was done with gospel rap. I was all but done with him. And I outright told God I didn't want to hear another word he had to say to me. Prior to going home that next day, I received a call from the choir director letting me know they were going to have a gospel explosion and they would love if I could make it, because they loved the way it moved the sanctuary when I was in that choir stand. At this point, I was down, broken, depressed, confused, and just looking for a remedy to the shattered pieces inside of me. So I agreed to it and I said, I'll be there. I could use some uplifting at the time anyway, so I definitely wasn't against it. So after a layover that made me late getting there, I still somehow made it to the gospel explosion 30 minutes early. Still had the smell of travel miles on me, but I made it there. And when I got there was a young lady who looked up to me as a big brother, not just in the church, but just as a big brother, who could see hurt all over me. Without asking anything, without saying a word, she stepped forward, she hugged me, and squeezed life into me. I told her a few years after that day that her hug saved my life that night. During the gospel explosion, there were several choirs who sang. I had sat there for about 2 hours at the time, and it had me stirred up on the inside. And I was ready to get up there with the choir I sang with, and I was ready to really jump into the way that I felt I needed to that night. But after a choir got up there that sang and blew the blew the roof off the place, our choir director let his feelings get in the way. He treated it more like a competition than a fellowship. Came and told us, we ain't singing. Singing that night could have helped the lives of many, including myself. Because after that prayer that I shared for God to keep me and my ex-fiance together didn't go in my favor, after that night, the gospel explosion, where I was just trying to sing and get things off my mind, my spiritual walk was never the same again. From that point, anytime I was out of the sight of people that I used to go to church with, or even used to share gospel rap with, because I was once a part of a group, I was chasing down the company of females to be medication to the pain I was taking on. It didn't matter if they were married, unmarried, in a relationship, unhappy, single, whatever the case was. If there was opportunity for me to take in a dose of medication, it's what I wanted. So in turning my back on God and answering to my pain, instead of pushing through and continuing to answer to my call, I ran around and I took on any woman that I could have and then just walk away afterwards like nothing happened. It was like the story of Cain and Abel. Because when Cain killed Abel, he had several chances to make things right after he did it. Because in it, he repented to God in between each act he committed towards his brother. Then he went back and did the same thing again. It was the same way when I was having sex with various females. I would share the act, then I would run off and repent to God for letting him down with what I was doing. Then I would go right back and find another one to share the same thing with. It was like the only pleasure I could find at the time was during sex. Outside of that, there was no pleasure for me. One of those many people that I took on, that I clearly told it would be no strings attached and never left me alone, would be the one that reshaped my character forever. After we shared our moment of sex and I told her that was it, she constantly got in my face. She constantly persisted we would be more. Eventually, I gave in, went to the courthouse and chose to marry her because my thought process was, I don't have to sniff out for medication anymore. She's an easy yes any given time that I want it, which she proved to be the whole time we were together. But all that glitters ain't gold. Easy come, easy go. And if it's something easy to get, you better run. Number one, we both were not in love with each other. We were using each other as replacements to what we truly wanted. Number two, neither one of us were faithful during that marriage. And number three, I gave up the chance to become a licensed minister just for fornication. Because in spite of all the hell that was going through my life, my pastor at the time took me under his wing, and I was in a minister's in training course. And during my time in that course, I had started to get my act together. I very much had. 3 classes away from earning my license, and I gave in to this young lady who was an easy yes to sex, my now ex-wife. So much infidelity throughout the course of it. There were plenty of signs that things shouldn't have taken place. It started when I left my home state to go to where she was currently residing, just to be with her. And God constantly told me, don't do it. Don't do it. And I reminded God that I was done listening to him, and I went and did it anyway. The day before we went to the courthouse, God outright told me she's running from something. So I questioned her about the very thing she's running from. And she told me she was running from nothing, and I believed it. I knew before then that the young lady was a liar, but I gave in to it. From the time we got married, I had to constantly see who she was talking to behind my back, which in the beginning would usually be using my cell phone. The first 10 months of our marriage, we were living under my grandmother's roof, not our own. There were so many signs that this marriage was not ordained by God. And the only reason that I got married to her as quick as I did is because when I did return to church, I didn't want people to know that I was having sex with someone I wasn't married to. And if she came up pregnant, I wanted to make sure that we were married first. During the course of our marriage, there was a time where I didn't even want to be touched by her, but God said one night as we went to sleep, let her hand rest on your chest. So I left it there. And when I went to sleep, I had a dream. And 6 men were exposed to me that she was talking to behind my back. I saw every face. I only knew 3 names. When I woke up the next morning, I asked God what to do next, still in shock that God was still talking to me with the way I was treating him. So God said, just take the ring off and the rest will happen. When she woke up that morning, I took the ring off as soon as she opened her eyes. And I said, you know something and I know something. And I'm not putting that ring back on until you tell me. And just as any manipulator does, she first got angry, saying she didn't know what I was talking about. Then the more that I relented, she started to break down and cry. Then eventually she gave in and she said she couldn't say it, so she wrote it down on paper and gave it to me, confirming that what I dreamed was true. There were 6 other men that she was talking to, one of which was her ex-fiance, and admitted she was still in love with him. Another ex who she was trying to have sex with again, they just couldn't find the right time and the right place to do so. The other 4, she was trying to make time for dates with. They just couldn't find a time and a way to make it happen without me finding out. I was very belligerent. And in spite of the day that I cursed God, I had not picked up a habit of cursing again after that until this very day. Right before she went to work that day, I called her out her name a few times. I snatched her phone from her and threw it and tried to break it. And I made sure it was right before the bus came to take her to work so she wouldn't have time to retaliate. When the phone didn't break, I picked it up and walked away with it. And I told her, you don't need this because you don't do what you do anyway. In that, by the time she clocked out from work that day, I had found out everything else she hadn't told me. After she walked out of her place of employment that day, I slammed her phone against her chest. I slapped her and I walked away. Later on, because at this point, she had nowhere else to go, and I didn't know how to get away from her because we were both still living under the same roof. I decided I was going to use her just as she was using me. She was using me just so she'd have a stable place to stay, and I wanted to get from under my grandmother and my mother's roof. So I used her to find me somewhere else to live. In the process of that, she said she was willing to stop talking to other men if I stopped talking to other females, friends or not, even family. So I agreed to it. That Father's Day, we were on a church van on the way home, and I caught her texting a list of men, and she said it was just for Father's Day. I reminded her we said we would not talk to people of the opposite sex at all. When we got back to my grandmother's home that day, she called her mother. And after she talked to her mother, came in my face and said, my mom said she talked to other men when she was married, so I'm going to keep doing it. I said, you do notice you said when she was married, right? And it came out that my ex-wife had never stopped talking to other men. She just made me stop talking to other women. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. She didn't want me to have any cake outside of her. When I found this out, I became enraged. And at the time we got into an argument. And in the midst of that argument, she kept putting her hand in my face, something like that. After the last time I told her, do not put your hand in my face like that, because when you do, I'm ready to get up and knock your head off. She lunges in my face and said, go ahead and do it. I get up with a closed fist, and right before I make contact with her, my hands open. But I grabbed her by the throat and had her pinned down in the chair. My grandmother and my mother comes to restrain me. My grandmother gets in my face and says, she is not worth your freedom. My ex-wife looked offended when my grandmother said that. In hearing my grandmother's words, and seeing that my ex-wife was offended to know that she wasn't worth me going to jail over, something clicked in me at that time, and I just walked out the room. Ironically, a few weeks after that, she did find us an apartment. Once I got in the apartment, I again took my ring off. She asked why. I say, because you're still a liar. And until you can stop telling lies, there's no need for me to wear a ring saying that I'm married to you. A few months later, it came out that she was pregnant. Instantly, she tried to say the child was mine. Instantly, she tried to say she had been with nobody else. She had went around town telling everybody the same thing. One day I was in church by myself, and my spirit was so troubled I couldn't even sit through the whole service, because I knew that a group of people connected to me were hiding something from me. I instantly cut the rest off without a word, but my ex-wife I confronted. It eventually came out that she had slept with somebody else prior to getting pregnant. She didn't want me to know because she wanted me to take responsibility for the child. Being that I grew up without a father, she thought that the guilt, or should I say the sympathy that I felt for another child growing up without a father would cause me to give in to it without further questioning anything. That day, she took off of work behind my back to be with this other man, along with many other days she took off work just because she didn't feel like going, caught up to her. She lost her job. The only one she had to count on was me when it was something financial. I told her to go and find the other man you slept with. She claimed she hadn't been in touch with them since they had laid together. One day I was on the way to work, and I said out my mouth, I hate her and I hate that baby, and I wish this whole situation would disappear. I came home that evening to her having contractions only 4 months into the pregnancy. I ran to the store to try to get her something to eat because she hadn't eaten all day, using her WIC, because I honestly didn't have any other money at the time. And they said she had to be present to use her WIC, so I had gone back to the apartment to tell her she needed to come to the store. I was willing to walk with her to make sure she made it there and home. By the time I got there, she screamed out her water broke. She sat on the toilet and she had a miscarriage. That night while she was in the hospital, I was in the apartment, consumed with guilt because of the words I had spoke that morning and how much I had stressed her out through the course of the pregnancy. How much unforgiveness and larceny was in my heart towards her. To be a murderer, to contribute to killing the life of a child. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be my last time doing so. After the miscarriage, it did come out that she had, in fact, still been in touch with the true father of the child. After that, my family helped me to pay for a separation. And after she eventually signed it, but then tried to weasel her way into staying in the apartment so that we wouldn't be physically separate, therefore prolonging the process of the whole situation, my family came through, and in less than 15 minutes, they had her out of my apartment and out of my life forever. No violence was used, but it was close to it. I want to take this moment because my cousin, who spearheaded the whole thing, let me know earlier this year that she had never received as much as a thank you for the sacrifice she made that day in helping me. Because when she came to help me, she had left her own child at risk of being without a mother had she gone to jail on my behalf. I'm taking this moment to say publicly, thank you for all that you and the rest of my family did on my behalf that day. I'm still eternally grateful, and the love hasn't gone anywhere for you all, just in case you spent years wondering. After that was said and done during the course of my separation, when I should have been taking time to heal, there were women in and out, in and out, in and out of my apartment. During that time, Tiger Woods was found out for cheating on his wife, and it was said he had affairs with 18 different women. And at that time, all I could say is at least Tiger Woods could count how many he had. The only thing I could count were the names I actually knew before going there with somebody. Out of every female that went in my apartment at that time, it was only 2 that walked in that I didn't have my way with sexually. One of which is still a very close friend to this day, because it's one of the friends that talked me out of that behavior. After my divorce was final, I was told by another friend that if I didn't know what else to do with myself, I just needed to sit down and do nothing to keep myself out of trouble. So for 3 months, that's what I did. In the process of all those other women that I took on during that year before I sat down and stopped, there was one I was sexual with, and being as miseducated as I was at the time, came to my apartment less than 24 hours later, pretended to throw up in my toilet while I was in the kitchen, came out and said she was pregnant. I believed it. A friend of mine gave me money to pay for an abortion, and after I paid for the abortion, I never heard from her again. That's why I said it was more than one time I contributed to the death of a child. On that case, though, it doesn't seem like there ever was a pregnancy. But with $90, I never saw that woman again. So after 3 months of sitting still and doing nothing, that's when I crossed paths with my wife of now. I didn't want anything past a friend at the time. All I wanted was someone to spend time with while the church I was attending at the time had their anniversary celebration. I had been hurt too many times, and I had hurt too many people to have the will to be in another relationship. But God had other plans. Through present day, my wife and I have only missed one Sunday together. We have shared dinner together every Sunday. We have seen the start of the next day nearly every day since we've known each other because of how long our conversations go. There was a time where my conversation with her was pure, where I allowed God to lead before I spoke. But then there came a time where I got in the way. Both before we got married and after we got married. But the worst happened after we got married. While she was pregnant with our now 11-year-old daughter, and I didn't like the way I was being talked to at home, I didn't like the fact that I had to ride a bus to work, although there was a car right in the yard. I was coming up with every excuse in the world to go and seek attention elsewhere because I wasn't getting it the way I wanted at home. Whether it was through conversation, makeout sessions, or sex, I was taking on something of a different sort with a different woman behind my wife's back for years, even after our daughter was born, even after things got better at home, even after she was no longer talking to me in a way that offended me. Once I picked up the habit, I had refused to let it go for years. All the while lying to her saying I wasn't doing that because she felt it for years. But I lied to her and told her I wasn't doing that. Lied to the church and told them I wasn't that type of person. And in the midst of all the people I was taking on behind her back, there was one I was sexual with and once again texted me and said they were pregnant. They asked me what did I think they should do, and my exact words were, set the child free. This is not a situation this child needs to be born into. I stole money from my family that was supposed to go towards bills, and I paid to make sure that I was not responsible for a child outside of my marriage. Once again, after that was done, we never made contact with each other again. But once I found out she was pregnant, I dropped to my knees and I screamed to God, I'd do anything if he could make this situation go away. Tell me what you need me to do. And as crazy as it may sound to you all, his exact words that day were, get your family out of that house. The future of this home is sabotaged because of your disobedience. And once you go to the place that I'm leading you, and the territory that I have waiting for you is encamped around you, and part of that territory can take on the children long enough, you need to get your wife alone and you need to tell her everything. Confess everything. Before my wife and I could share that moment, she called me one night that I got home later than usual from work. I didn't answer the call, but when I put it in my pocket, the call picked up anyway. And for close to 20 minutes, she heard me entertaining a prostitute. I picked up the phone once I found out she was up there. I tried to lie and deny that she heard what she was hearing. And in the process, once again, taking money from my family that I spent to feed this prostitute while she was in the car. When I got home that night, she looked at me and she told me to cut it with the lies and that she knew it was more to it. She eventually took my phone, and when she looked at my phone, she found out all of the conversations I was having through text with other females behind her back. Other females I was making arrangements to give money to before work behind her back. Females that I was arranging to make time to meet up with when I thought my wife would be out of town. And she even saw on Facebook, because at the time she didn't have access to my page, activity that was taking place with other females up there, both on my public page and through Messenger. My wife was enraged. I was broken down about it. I took a long walk and had a talk with God that weekend. It was only by the work of God that within one weekend, my wife forgave years of dishonor and dishonesty on my part and decided to give me a clean slate. But what would I do with that clean slate years later? Last year in 2022, she found out that although I was no longer being sexual with other females, I was still being flirtatious and furthermore slandering her name to other females, talking her down for the assignment that she was doing and staying home, being caretaker over our children, and truly taking time to rest while I was working and I was taking care of the bills at home, making it seem as if I was doing everything by myself when that was not the case. Because any money my wife came across, she used to help us out. But the way I made it seem that she sat home and she did nothing and expected me to do everything both at work and when I got home. She saw these conversations and it broke her down. Not only was I being an emotional cheater, betrayal on every level, but I was tearing down her character and expecting the respect of her and everybody else at home and blowing up at them every time they didn't give it to me. Till this day, the anxiety of my family is through the roof because of the temper tantrums that took place at my hands in their presence over the years. They are still coming down from the man that I once was. After she learned of those conversations I was having behind her back last year, after she learned I was still spending money on other females behind her back, taken from this family, when she decided that things were through last year and I had contemplated suicide once again, I had given up on talking to God because I truly didn't think he wanted to hear anything else from me. But I went down to the basement, initially just to give my wife her space, but to still be in earshot if my children needed anything from me. It was during my time down there that I went through a journey that would change my life. A decree of divorce from TJ. Something that I had used as a nickname because I got tired of people calling me Tomal for my first name. It never sat well with the family I grew up with when I went by that nickname because they were proud of my first name. And the nickname actually started because it's what my ex-wife chose to call me instead of Tomal. But little did I know, TJ was more than just a nickname. TJ was the birth of a monster that I had to put to death. And during my time in the basement, that is exactly what I partnered with God to do. I killed TJ and he will never return again. Tomal Jernigan represents who I was at the age of 20 when I lived for Christ, when I was sold out, when I walked without distraction, when you didn't see me angry very often, when I was safe to be around, when I was truly a help and not a hindrance, when I showed love and not hatred, when I put away all malice and showed gentle loving kindness. Tomal Jernigan returned after TJ was put to death last year. And I will never make room for him again. I thank God for what happened between August 14th and August 26th of last year, because it made room for who I am once again today. A man willing to fulfill his purpose. A man who has been called back to ministry. a man who is sharing ministry pure from the heart and making it known for people who still take on habits that I once did, that may have done it and still haven't forgiven themselves, that there is life after your bad choices. There is something better than what you've been leaning on to. There is still greater in you. Nothing has destroyed that. Answer what is greater, let go of what is lesser. Ages 21 through age 36 are years that I am not able to get back. But age 37 and going forward, I will do what I was ordained to do instead of what I once allowed myself to be pressured to do. TJ is dead. Tomal Jernigan is alive again and here to do God's will and nobody else's. Anyone who is listening that was hurt as a result of my actions over the last 15 years, I am sincerely sorry. And I do pray that whether it be right away or with time, you'll find it in your hearts to forgive me. Every moment I get, I still apologize to my wife and children through present day. Because in the midst of these actions, I had a nerve to be cocky about it, narcissistic even, putting my family through a hell that they did not deserve to go through. But I vow they will never go through it again. And I vow that anyone who is still connected to me will not be connected to a monster on the other side of a minister again. I am here walking in truth, and I will never choose to live a lie again. Those habits which once destroyed my character are long gone, and they will never couple with me again. Right before my last marriage was over, a prophet met with me right before my ex-wife got pregnant, as a matter of fact. And in the midst of many words that this prophet prophesied to me, I was told, preacher. And I answered back, I was at that place once, but I'm definitely nowhere close to there now. She said again, preacher. You can't get away from it. Then she said, Judas. Because she knew that what I was doing was committing acts of betrayal. And just so happened, I would have never ran into this prophet if I wasn't trying to betray my ex-wife at the time with the person I initially came there with. Had this prophet not stepped in the way, who knows what else would have happened that day. This prophet had never heard of me before. But then the prophet said, let her go. And I knew at the time she was talking about my ex-wife. And she said, she is going to destroy your destiny. A lot of the flaws that it took so long to recover from in my character happened because I didn't walk away right away that day. I held on to my ex-wife for selfish purposes. But then she said later, she is yours. And I thought I knew who she was talking about at the time, but I didn't. But ironically, the one that she was talking about that day was very closely connected to the one that I was there trying to commit the act of betrayal with that day. My wife of now. I had no clue about. And come to find out, several times over the course of the 24 years before we met each other, My wife and I have practically been right around the corner from each other. But God didn't want us to run into each other too soon. The prophet also said that day, your mother is going to cry over your grave. And at the time, her face was flooded with tears because she could feel it on the inside. She said, your mother is going to cry over your grave if you don't stop what you're doing. That day should have been enough for me to make the change. But the change that should have took place that day, back in 2008, did not start to manifest until last year. So I'm also saying to the prophet who spoke to me that day, I'm finally doing what God told you I'm supposed to be doing. I'm finally here. I finally arrived. Thanks be to God, my mother is not crying over my grave. I'm still alive and I'm doing right. Your words that day truly touched me, and as you see, they were never forgotten. And here I stand as a prophet myself now. I am not around to be fabricated before anybody else. And with this video, I'm not going to act like I've never done anything wrong myself. But I am here to encourage, to inspire, and help to break chains off of others, just like chains were broken off of me. I love you all with the love of Christ, even those who have found just cause not to love me back. I love you. God bless you all.